It was a gray February morning when I first realized something was wrong. I was standing outside the Charleston Police Department, staring at the entrance like it was the mouth of some dark tunnel I didn't want to go through. People moved in and out, an old man with a cane, a teenage boy with headphones, a mother dragging her crying toddler. But I stood still, clutching my coat like it could hold me together. 2 weeks had passed since the accident, since Gregory, since the call that shattered everything. Now I was here to collect the last things he ever touched. He always said I took too long to make decisions. You can stand outside a store for 30 minutes before deciding whether to go in, he used to joke, nudging me playfully. His voice still echoed in my mind, clear and warm and familiar, but it only made the silence deeper now. I finally stepped through the doors. The building smelled like paper, cheap coffee, and something metallic I couldn't name. A tired-looking woman behind the glass partition raised her eyes. "I'm Lena Whitmore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You called me about my husband's belongings." She nodded without a word, scribbled something in a ledger, and told me, "The detective will be with you shortly. Please have a seat." I sat down on a cold wooden bench, locking my fingers together tightly. My hands were shaking, my eyes fixed on the tile floor, gray with specks of black, like pepper scattered across cement. Gregory always teased me about that too. "You study floors when you're nervous," he'd say. "Looking for answers from the ground, Whitmore." I didn't answer. Not then. Not now. The floor said nothing. "Mrs. Whitmore." I looked up. A man in his 40s with a wrinkled suit and kind but exhausted eyes stood at the hallway. "Detective Peters," he said, offering a small nod. "Let's talk in my office." The room was cluttered, files stacked high, walls covered in posters about road safety and photos of crumpled vehicles that looked too much like the one Gregory had been in. My stomach turned. The detective noticed. "Sorry about the decor," he muttered, moving one folder aside. "Not the best atmosphere, I know." He gestured to a chair. "Have a seat. I just need your signature for the release of your husband's personal effects." He slid a paper toward me. I didn't read it. I signed. Then he handed me a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside, Gregory's phone with a cracked case, his worn leather wallet, a pack of mint gum, a lighter. Odd, since he quit smoking 2 years ago, and a heavy keyring. I held the bag to my chest like it was him, like if I pressed hard enough, maybe I could feel his heartbeat through the plastic. "Again, I'm so sorry for your loss," the detective said quietly. "If you need anything, don't hesitate." I nodded and left without another word. Outside, the cold hit me harder than I expected. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't get the key into the car door. I finally managed and tossed the bag onto the passenger seat. It sat there like silent accusation. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and tears I didn't let fall. Back in the kitchen, I made tea, not because I wanted to drink it, but because doing something, anything, felt better than drowning in silence. Then, finally, I opened the bag. One by one, I laid everything out. Phone, wallet, gum, lighter, keys. Too many keys. And 2 of them I had never seen before. One was small, like a mailbox key. The other was larger, unusually shaped, with jagged notches that looked like puzzle pieces. A plastic tag dangled from the ring, faded and scratched, but the number was still readable, 47. My heart started to beat faster. I couldn't explain why, but those keys didn't feel random. They felt like a door into a life I didn't know my husband had lived. I stared at the keys on the table, my tea going cold beside me. I didn't touch them at first. I just sat there, hands in my lap, heart thudding like it was trying to escape my chest. Those 2 keys didn't belong. I knew every lock in our lives, our house, the car, the garage, even the cabin up at Lake Moultrie his parents used to own before they sold it. But these were strangers. And yet, they had been in his pocket the night he died. I picked them up slowly, letting the metal rest in my palm. The small one looked like something for a mailbox, maybe an old one from an apartment. The larger one was heavier, thick and odd with angular teeth. Not something you found in a typical suburban lock. And then there was the plastic tag. 47. I whispered the number out loud like it might answer back. 47. Gregory worked in construction engineering. Maybe it was for a site, but he already had a work key card. Plain corporate and plastic. These were personal. Carried close. The way you carry something important or something you don't want to explain. The kettle hissed behind me. I had forgotten I turned it back on. I poured myself a new cup and sat by the window, watching the wind stir the trees. The sky hung low, gray and swollen, just like my chest. I hadn't slept properly since the accident. Every night I lay awake, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock, the weight of his footsteps in the hallway, the brush of his hand against my back in bed. And every night, nothing. That night 2 weeks ago, I had waited for him longer than usual. Midnight passed, and I finally called his phone. No answer. Just voicemail. I told myself maybe he was stuck at a late site or fell asleep in his truck. But deep down, I'd known something was wrong. I'd felt it. The call from the hospital came at 2:14 a.m. A flat voice. An accident on the bypass. He died instantly. They said that part like it was supposed to be a comfort. I clutched the keys tighter. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name that made my stomach knot. Rachel Monroe. My best friend. Or, at least, that's what I'd thought for the last 7 years. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Lena, sweetheart, how are you?" Her voice was soft, filled with that kind of concern that sounded a little too careful. "I just got back from the station," I said. "Gregory's things." "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. That must have been awful." She hesitated, then added, "Listen, do you want to meet up? Just for a bit? I just picked Addie up from school and thought maybe it'd be good for you not to be alone." I looked at the clock. It was already past 3. The day had slipped away. "Sure," I said. "The usual place?" "Of course," Rachel replied. "I'll see you in 30. I hung up and stared at the keys one more time before slipping them into my purse. Something in me needed to carry them now. I didn't know why, but they felt unfinished. The cafe was only a few blocks from my house. Cozy, small-town southern charm, with soft lighting and antique furniture no one actually wanted to sit on for too long. When I walked in, I spotted Rachel by the window table. Our table. Addie was with her, glued to a tablet, legs swinging off the seat. "Hi, Auntie Lena," she chirped without looking up. "Hey, sunshine," I said, managing a smile. Rachel stood and hugged me. She smelled like the same vanilla lavender lotion she always wore, but something about it made me shiver. "You've lost weight," she said, concern etched into her brow. "You need to eat." "I'm trying," I lied. We ordered coffee, cake for her, and orange juice for Addie. Rachel leaned in. "How are you, really?" I shrugged. Some moments, I feel like I understand he's gone. Others, I'm still listening for his footsteps. Rachel reached out and squeezed my hand, her touch warm. "That's normal. You loved him. It takes time." I nodded, and before I could stop myself, I reached into my purse. "These were in his pocket," I said, placing the keyring gently on the table. "All the others I know, except these 2. Look." She froze for half a breath. Just half, but I saw it, a flicker in her eyes, a tightening around her mouth. Then she picked them up, and her hand trembled. Rachel examined the keys in silence, turning them slowly in her hand. The large one caught the light. It really did look strange, like it belonged in some old, industrial door no one used anymore. The small one dangled beneath it, almost forgettable in comparison. Rachel cleared her throat. "No idea," she said too quickly, her voice a little too high. "Maybe from a project site? Didn't Greg work all over town?" I shook my head. He had a badge for the sites and a set of work keys. These aren't them. She placed the keys back on the table and reached for her coffee, both hands wrapped tight around the cup. Her fingers trembled just slightly, like they were trying to hold something in that was already slipping out. "You shouldn't dwell on this, Lena," she said gently. "You've been through enough. Who knows what men carry in their pockets? A spare key for a storage unit, maybe? A lock he meant to get rid of, but forgot? It could be anything." Her tone was soft, too soft. I tilted my head. "Are you okay?" "Me? Of course." She forced a smile. "I just hate seeing you like this." Addie piped up from the tablet. "Mom, can I go play the claw machine?" Rachel nodded without turning. "Go ahead, baby. Stay where I can see you." Addie hopped down and ran toward the glowing arcade games in the back corner. Rachel fumbled for her purse. "Shoot, I don't think I have change." She opened her bag and dumped the contents onto the table. Wallet, lipstick, tissues, keys, and there they were. My heart stopped. The same keys. Identical. Same small mailbox key. Same odd, jag big one. Same worn plastic tag with the number 47. I couldn't breathe. "Rachel," I whispered. She looked up. "Where did you get those?" Her eyes widened, just for a second. Then she laughed, nervous, forced. "Oh, these? No, they're not the same. You're just imagining. All keys look the same when you're upset." "No," I said. "They don't." I leaned in, my voice low and steady. "They're exactly the same, Rachel. Right down to the scratches on the tag." Rachel flushed. She began scooping everything back into her purse like it was burning her hands. "You're overthinking," she said. "Grief messes with your head. You're looking for something that isn't there." But her voice cracked on the last word. I sat back, heart pounding. My fingers curled into the fabric of my coat. "Why would Gregory have the same keys as you?" I asked. "I don't know," she snapped, then added more softly, "Maybe he found them and never returned them." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She stood up. "I should go get Addie. We have to leave soon anyway." "I thought you said you had time." "Plans changed." She turned away quickly and headed for the games. I watched her go, watched the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she reached for her daughter with hands that shook more now than before. Something inside me had begun to unravel. She came back with Addie, who pouted. I didn't get to finish my turn. "Next time, baby," Rachel said, her smile tight. She turned to me. "I'll call you later, okay?" I didn't answer. "Take care of yourself," she said. "Really?" Then she left, one hand on Addie's shoulder, the other gripping the purse like it held her together. I sat there long after the door closed behind them, staring at the keys on the table, my heart cold in my chest. Identical. They were identical, and I no longer believed it was just a coincidence. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the moment her purse spilled open, the way her face changed when she saw the keys on the table, how her fingers trembled when she scooped them back in, like they were evidence she hadn't meant to show. I knew Rachel, or at least I thought I did. We'd been best friends since that ESL class 7 years ago, the one we both dropped out of when life got busy and babies didn't come the way we planned. She was there when Gregory proposed. She helped pick out the dress I never wore because we opted for a quiet ceremony in the courthouse. She brought lasagna the week I had the flu and flowers when I lost my father. She was the one person I trusted enough to cry in front of. But that look in her eyes, that wasn't grief. That wasn't concern. That was panic. And panic didn't lie. The next morning, she came to my apartment unannounced. She brought a paper bag that smelled like butter and cinnamon. "I made muffins," she said softly, standing in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes and a forced smile. I let her in. I didn't trust her, but I wanted to see how far she'd go to keep lying. In the kitchen, she sat at the table, cupping her coffee like it might shield her from what she knew was coming. "About yesterday," she started. I said nothing. "I'm sorry if I seemed off. Seeing you like that, it rattled me. I didn't want you to spiral. so I probably sounded defensive. Probably, I said, my voice flat. She laughed nervously. Okay, definitely. I leaned forward, looking her dead in the eyes. Rachel, those keys you dropped, they were the same. The exact same. She blinked fast. No, they weren't. Don't lie. I'm not. Yes, you are. She swallowed. Lena, honey, you're grieving. I know how sharp everything feels right now, but you're making something out of nothing. I waited, then asked, can I see your keys again? She reached for her purse, then froze. Oh, I forgot them. I left them at my neighbor's. She waters my plants when I'm away. That wasn't just a lie. That was a prepared lie. I folded my arms. So, how did you get into your building this morning? She looked away. The building has a code. You know that. And your unit? I didn't lock it last night. I let the silence hang. She fidgeted. Look, I don't know what you're trying to prove. But I'm not trying to prove anything, Rachel. I'm just trying to understand why my husband had keys that match yours. I'm trying to understand why you're lying. Her face twisted. For a second, I thought she might tell me. Might say the words and get it over with. But instead, she stood up. I have to pick Addie up. She has a doctor's appointment. It's 11 in the morning. She grabbed her coat. It's a pediatric thing. Routine. They're backed up, so we had to go early. She didn't look at me as she left. Just mumbled, I hope you get some rest, okay? And closed the door behind her. I stood in the silence, the bag of muffins untouched on the counter. I looked around my apartment, the framed photos, the throw blanket Gregory always pulled over my feet, the coffee mug he chipped but refused to throw out, and felt it all start to rot. Rachel was lying. That much I knew. The question was, what exactly had she been hiding with those keys? I didn't want to break into anyone's home. I wasn't that kind of person. I was the type who double-checked locks, returned grocery carts, and said bless you to strangers who sneezed. But by Thursday morning, something inside me had changed. Rachel had called just after sunrise. Her voice was rushed and unusually distant. She said her mother had slipped and broken her leg, that she was taking Addie to stay with her for a few days. I'll be out of town, she said. Probably until Sunday. Just wanted you to know. And then, without waiting for a response, she hung up. I stared at my phone. She was leaving the city. The apartment, if the keys fit, would be empty. And I had the keys. I tried to talk myself out of it, pacing the kitchen, drinking half a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands. I told myself it was a violation, an overreaction, a mistake. But another voice, the one that had been whispering to me since the accident, was louder now. You need to know. By 10, I was parked outside a generic brick building in North Charleston, a place I had only seen once, briefly, in the corner of a forgotten address book Gregory kept in his drawer. Unit 47. I walked up to the third floor. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old dryer sheets. I stood in front of the door, heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. I took out the keyring, inserted the small key into the top lock. It turned effortlessly. The large one slid into the bottom lock like it had done it 100 times before. The door opened. The scent hit me first, soft floral perfume I had smelled 1,000 times on Rachel's sweaters, and beneath it, something unmistakable. The warm, masculine trace of Gregory's cologne. I stepped inside slowly, as if the floor might vanish beneath me. The apartment was modest, clean, cozy. There were toys on the shelf, a small pink backpack hanging from a hook by the door, a pair of child sneakers beside a man's worn leather shoes. On the living room wall, framed photos stared back at me. Rachel, Gregory, Addie. In one, Gregory had his arm around Rachel's waist, his head tilted slightly toward her like he always did with me. In another, he was kneeling beside Addie at a birthday party, lighting the candles on a cake. They were smiling, all three of them, and not the awkward, forced kind of smiles you fake for pictures. No, these were happy. I moved through the apartment like a ghost. In the bedroom, there was a tall dresser. Inside were his shirts, folded the way I used to fold them. His cologne bottle sat on the nightstand half full. I opened the closet and my breath caught. His jacket, the navy one I gave him for our anniversary. He told me he lost it. I walked into the bathroom. A toothbrush, his razor, a bottle of shaving cream, the same brand he'd always used at home. This wasn't a place he visited. He lived here. He had a life here, a second life. I sat down on the edge of the bed, barely breathing. The sheets smelled like both of them, Rachel and Gregory. On the nightstand, tucked into a small basket, was a drawing. Crayons on construction paper, Addie's handwriting. Me and Mommy and Daddy. 3 stick figures beneath a bright yellow sun. I ran my finger over the words, over the childish lines, and then I realized the handwriting was clumsy, with some letters backward, like the birthday card she gave me last year. She must have been 5, maybe 6. She wasn't just calling him Gregory. She was calling him Daddy. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at that drawing. It was so innocent, so cheerful, everything my heart wasn't. My hands were numb, my breath shallow. I was sitting in a life that had no room for me. A life Gregory built without me. I stood up slowly, as if moving too fast might wake the nightmare. On the fridge were more drawings, snapshots of moments I never knew happened. Gregory teaching Addie to ride a bike. Gregory cooking. Gregory laughing. All in this apartment. All with Rachel and Addie. Back in the bedroom, I opened the drawer next to the bed and found a stack of documents. Most of it was mundane, receipts, bills, old grocery lists. But beneath it all was a manila envelope. Inside, a DNA test. My vision blurred as I read the words. Probability of paternity. 99.9% Gregory was Addie's father. I staggered back a step, gripping the dresser for balance. Dennis had mentioned it once, just in passing, that Gregory had seemed distracted lately. Said he was acting strange, pulling away from people, even him. I had brushed it off as stress. I didn't want to see what was in front of me, but it was here now, undeniable. I placed the envelope back exactly where I found it. I didn't need it. The truth was heavy enough without proof. As I stepped back into the living room, the front door handle rattled. My chest seized. I had forgotten. Rachel said she was leaving this morning, but maybe something had changed. I didn't have time to run. The hallway was too long. There was nowhere to hide. The door opened. Addie's voice echoed first. "Mom, I forgot Mr. Bunny." Rachel followed, close behind. "Quick, baby, grab it. We're already running late." She saw me but said nothing yet. Instead, she spoke over her shoulder, more to herself than to me. We barely made it out of town before Addie realized Mr. Bunny was gone. She wouldn't stop crying. We had to turn back. She stepped into the apartment and froze. We locked eyes. Her face turned to stone. "Lena," she said, her voice brittle. "What are you doing here?" I didn't flinch. "You tell me." Her eyes dropped to the keys dangling from my fingers. "I used his," I said, answering the question she didn't dare ask. "The ones you said didn't exist." Addie spotted me and beamed. "Hi, Auntie Lena. What are you doing here?" Rachel's voice cracked. "Sweetheart, go wait in the hallway for a second, okay?" But now Addie. The child's footsteps padded down the hallway. Rachel shut the door behind her, then turned back to me. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "Then maybe you shouldn't have lied." Her mouth opened, closed. I stepped forward, pulled the drawing from the nightstand, and held it up. "She calls him Daddy, and he wasn't he?" Rachel swallowed hard. "Yes." "For how long?" She dropped onto the couch like her legs had given out. "It's been about 2 years." 2 years, I repeated, my voice dull. 2 years he lived here with you. With her. She nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. It started after his promotion. That was 2 years ago. He said he needed a place to clear his head, and then he just stayed. I didn't plan for this, Lena. No one does. But you stayed. I didn't think you'd understand. You were his wife, and you were supposed to be my friend. I still am. I laughed once, short and sharp. No, you're not. Not after this. She looked up at me, tears welling. I loved him. I didn't blink. So did I. She wiped at her face. It just happened. We never meant for it to go this far. You mean for him to raise a second family while he told me he was working late? Rachel said nothing. I looked around once more. At the cozy home, the framed pictures, the life. I hope it was worth it, I said. And then I walked out past Daddy in the hallway, her small face confused and hopeful. Will you come over again soon? She asked. I paused, forcing a smile. No, baby, I whispered. I won't. The air outside felt heavier than when I'd walked in. Maybe it was the weight of truth settling on my shoulders. Maybe it was just Charleston humidity creeping in ahead of the afternoon rain. Either way, my legs moved on their own, carrying me to my car, but my mind was still trapped in that apartment. Among Gregory's clothes, Addie's drawings, and Rachel's lies. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from James, Gregory's older brother. Hey, just checking in. You doing okay? I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the message, then finally typed, I need to talk. Can we meet? He called almost instantly. Where are you? I told him. We agreed on the park near my building. 20 minutes later, we were walking the path near the duck pond like we used to do every holiday when Gregory was still alive and pretending to be a husband. James glanced sideways at me. You look pale. I've had better mornings. I figured. He paused. Rachel called me. Of course she did. Said you found out. I found everything, I said. The apartment, the pictures, the DNA test. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm sorry. How long have you known? I asked. James hesitated. That was enough of an answer. 6 months, he admitted. Maybe a little more. I stopped walking. 6 months? And you said nothing. He turned to me, his expression tight. What was I supposed to say, Lena? Hey, your husband's got a whole second life with your best friend. Surprise? Yes, I snapped. That's exactly what you were supposed to say. He winced. I didn't want to hurt you. And he didn't want to hurt me either, right? That's why he lied. That's why he tucked his toothbrush into her bathroom drawer and told me he was working overtime. James looked genuinely pained. It was wrong. I told him that. I told him he couldn't live like that. But he did. Yes. And you let him. James didn't answer. We sat on a bench overlooking the pond. Ducks glided across the water, totally unaware of how messy human lives could get. Did he ever say he was going to leave me? I asked. No. He said he couldn't choose. That he loved you both. I laughed under my breath. You can't love two people and lie to both of them. I think he convinced himself he wasn't lying, James said quietly. He said he felt safe with you, grounded, and with Rachel he felt alive. I stared at the water. So I was the foundation. She was the thrill. I don't think it was that simple. It never is, but it always ends the same. James turned toward me. Lena, I know I should have told you. I carry that guilt. But you deserve to hear this. He did love you. In his way. Deeply. But he was weak. And selfish. And scared. I didn't answer. I just don't want this to ruin you, he added. You're strong. Don't let this turn you bitter. I nodded slowly. I won't. But I also won't pretend this didn't happen. He looked relieved. Good. That's good. I stood up. Thank you for meeting me. He got to his feet too. "If you ever need anything," I gave him a tired smile, "I'll let you know." As I walked back to my car, I realized something strange. The betrayal didn't feel like fire anymore. It felt like ice, sharp, clean, and final. Gregory was dead, but the lies he left behind, they were still very much alive. I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly through the city for almost an hour, letting the turns decide for me. Streets blurred into each other. Memories clung to every corner. Gregory had taken me to that diner once after a long workday. We'd laughed over burnt coffee and greasy fries. That bookstore, he bought me a poetry collection there just because the cover reminded him of my eyes. None of it felt real anymore. When I finally walked through my front door, the silence wasn't comforting. It was accusing. This apartment used to be our sanctuary. Now it was a museum of half-truths. His shoes by the door. His coat still hanging in the hallway. The cologne bottle on the dresser, half empty, like he might return to finish it. I stood in the living room for a long time, staring at our wedding photo on the wall. He was smiling at me like I was the only person in the world. That same smile he gave Addie when lighting her birthday candles. That same smile Rachel said he used when reading bedtime stories. How many versions of Gregory had there been? How many lies had I called love? I grabbed a box from the hallway closet and started packing. Not out of rage, not even sadness, just necessity. I couldn't breathe with his things everywhere. Shirts, ties, cufflinks. The socks I used to fold with care. The t-shirts I'd stolen to sleep in when he was away. One of them still smelled like him, and I almost dropped it. Almost. I taped the first box shut, then another, and another. Around 6, I called James again. "Can you help me take some of Gregory's things to your parents' house?" He showed up an hour later, no questions asked. As we loaded boxes into his trunk, he asked gently, "What are you going to do now?" I thought for a moment. "I'm going to live. For real this time. For myself." James smiled. "That sounds like the best thing you could do." That night, I sat on the balcony, legs tucked under a blanket, a glass of wine in my hand. The city lights shimmered below me. Somewhere, children were laughing. Somewhere, someone was telling the truth. I pulled out my notebook, one I hadn't touched since before Gregory died, and flipped to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "My life from now on." Then I started a list. 1. Sell the apartment. 2. Move to a place with more light. 3. Take that Italian class I always put off. 4. Travel alone, anywhere, everywhere. 5. Learn to cook something that takes hours, just because I can. 6. Stop asking permission to be happy. I didn't cry that night, not even once. The pain was still there, yes, but it had a shape now. It had boundaries. And most importantly, it no longer controlled me. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a message. From Rachel. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but Addie keeps asking about you. I told her you're busy. She said she misses you." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I turned it off. Not out of cruelty, out of survival. Because if I answered now, I'd lose myself again. And I had just begun to remember who I was. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment on the east side of Charleston. It wasn't large, but it was mine. The walls were painted in soft cream, the floors warm with sunlight in the afternoons. No more ghosts lingered in the corners. No more lies slept in the closets. Below, the magnolia trees were beginning to bloom early, small white blossoms opening like promises. Spring had come early this year, or maybe, for once, I'd come to meet it. Inside, a tabby cat named Rufus jumped onto the kitchen counter, meowing with practiced arrogance. I used to say I wasn't a cat person, but maybe I just hadn't had the space to become one. My mornings were simple now. Coffee from a French press, a newspaper spread across the table, the quiet hum of the world waking up outside my window. I no longer checked 2 phones. I no longer waited for footsteps that never came. I had gone back to work after everything unraveled, but within months I'd taken a chance, applied for a leadership role at a local architectural heritage firm. Gregory had always said I wasn't cutthroat enough for that kind of job. Turns out he was wrong. I got the position, and I was good at it. Better than good. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I took evening Italian classes downtown. It had started as a joke, a bucket list leftover. But I kept going. Not because I needed it, but because I enjoyed being bad at something again. Learning slowly. Starting fresh. That's where I met Michael. He was one of the instructors, warm, self-deprecating, a single dad who always had chalk on his sleeves and stories about his son Leo. We didn't fall into anything fast. I was too careful. He was too respectful. But over time, he became a familiar rhythm, a safe space, someone who looked me in the eyes and never once made me feel like I had to guess what he was thinking. We'd go on walks after class, share gelato on his porch, talk about books, travel, grief, mistakes. He never asked for more than I could give, and because of that, I gave more than I ever thought I could again. One Saturday morning, we wandered through the farmer's market, hand in hand, and I realized I wasn't looking for shadows anymore. I wasn't listening for a voice that had lied. I was here, with someone real. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk, flipping through a few old journals. Pages where I used to beg the universe for answers. Pages stained with tears and anger and the ache of not knowing. Now I knew everything, and somehow knowing hadn't destroyed me. The pain didn't vanish. It had simply reshaped itself into something quieter, something I could carry without breaking. Gregory was gone. Rachel was gone. And I was still standing. Not bitter. Not broken. Free. Outside, Rufus curled in a patch of sunlight on the windowsill, purring like a small, content engine. And inside me, something purred too. A soft, steady hum of peace. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard Rachel in the hallway that day. If I had just kept walking, trusting blindly, choosing not to know. Maybe I would still be married to a ghost. Maybe I'd still be sleeping beside someone who smiled with his mouth but hid with his soul. But I did stop. I did listen. And it shattered everything. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes, breaking is the only way the truth can get in. The old me would have tried to forgive too quickly. Would have clung to the memory of Gregory instead of accepting the man he truly was. I would have made excuses. Swallowed pain like it was my fault. But I didn't. I let myself feel it. All of it. The humiliation. The rage. The loss. And then I let it go. Not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved freedom. One afternoon, as I packed the last of Gregory's things for donation, old books, a pair of cufflinks, a mug that said "World's Best Husband" that now felt like a cruel joke, I found a note I had written him years ago. It was short, just 4 words, "Come home to me." I stared at it for a while, then folded it gently and dropped it into the donation box. He never really did come home. Not to me. And that's okay now, because I came home to myself, to the woman I had buried under compromise, to the voice I had silenced to keep the peace, to the dreams I'd postponed for a man who was never fully mine. Rachel still sends a message every few months, always polite, always indirect. I never respond. I don't hate her. I just don't owe her anything anymore. As for Addie, sometimes I see little girls her age in the park, and for a second I think of what could have been. But then I remind myself she has her family, and I'm building mine, in my own way, on my own terms. Michael and I are planning a trip to Umbria this fall. He says it's quiet and slow and soaked in good wine. I tell him I want to learn how to make pasta from scratch. He says he'll handle the wine. We laugh. We plan. And neither of us makes promises we can't keep. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of your own heartbreak, whether it's betrayal, abandonment, or just the slow erosion of love, let me say this. You are not foolish for having trusted. You are not weak for having loved. But you are braver than you know for choosing yourself now. There is no shame in walking away. There is no failure in saying, "This is not enough for me." The greatest revenge isn't in what you say to them. It's in the life you build without them. One brick, one truth, one morning where you wake up and realize you are no longer waiting to be chosen, because you already chose yourself. And that, quietly, completely, is where everything begins again. I was already in my dress when my phone rang. It was Travis. I thought he was calling to say he was on his way, maybe to tell me he couldn't wait to see me at the courthouse, maybe to tell me how much he loved me. Instead, I answered with a smile in my voice and heard silence, just breathing. Then, slowly, carefully, like he was trying not to break something fragile, he said, "Savannah, I can't marry you." I remember the world tilting, like someone had taken the floor out from under me. I had spent that morning brushing powdered sugar off my sleeves, trying not to cry when Mama kept fussing over the seating chart. I had smiled at Aunt Louise, who drove in from Alabama, let my best friend Shelby twist my hair into soft curls, and tried to ignore that quiet, nervous flutter in my chest, that sense that something wasn't quite right. But even that quiet warning couldn't have prepared me for those words. I can't marry you. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the wooden floor with a soft thud, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. The room went silent. Mama looked up from the mirror where she was adjusting her lipstick. My dad, who had come in with a fresh cup of coffee, froze mid-step. For a long second, nobody moved. Then I whispered, almost to myself, "He's not coming." "What do you mean he's not coming?" Mama blinked, then started shaking her head as if she could unhear what I just said. "That's not funny, Savannah. Stop joking." "I'm not joking," I said. He said he changed his mind. Everything after that was a blur. The hush in the room turned into noise, plates clinking in the kitchen, Mama crying out, "What do I even tell people?" Shelby rushing toward me, her arms outstretched. But I didn't want anyone to touch me. I couldn't be consoled. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left a girl-shaped shell in a white dress and borrowed veil. I walked to the window. Outside, the folding chairs were already set. Balloons tied to the porch, railing bobbed gently in the wind. I saw my little cousin playing with flower petals in the front yard. She was wearing the pink dress we bought together just last week. The air smelled like peach pie and springtime, like everything was still normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I turned around slowly and looked at my parents. Mama was already on the phone with someone, probably my aunt, probably trying to figure out how to undo a wedding in under an hour. Daddy just stood there, looking at me the way he looked at broken fences or busted engines, like he was already thinking about how to fix it. But he couldn't fix this. "I can't stay here," I whispered. "Where would you go?" Daddy asked. "I don't know, just not here." Then, like some kind of answer from above, my phone buzzed again. It was Aunt Jolene. I picked up. "I heard," she said, no need for small talk. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "Pack your bag, darlin'. Come stay with me for a while." I didn't even say goodbye. I hung up and walked out of the room, still wearing the dress. I didn't take off the veil. I didn't grab my shoes. I just walked straight out the front door into the Georgia sun, into a new life I hadn't planned for. I didn't cry until I was on the bus, face pressed against the dusty window, watching my old town fall away behind me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything. The bus to Willow Creek was half empty, but I took the last row anyway. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want anyone to look at me too long and start asking questions. My veil was gone, but I was still wearing the dress, crumpled and smudged from the ride, the lace snagged near my hip. I hadn't had the courage to change. It felt like the only thing holding my body together, like if I took it off, I'd unravel completely. Every bump in the road made my stomach turn. I stared out the window as we passed open fields and broken fences, tin roof houses and clotheslines swaying in the wind. Everything looked so ordinary, so heartbreakingly unaware that my entire life had just collapsed. When I finally stepped off the bus, Aunt Jolene was already waiting. Her hair was piled high on her head like always, and she wore a denim jacket over her church dress, like she couldn't decide if she was coming from Sunday service or a cattle auction. She didn't say anything when she saw me, just nodded, picked up my bag and said, "Let's get you somewhere quiet." I thought she meant her house, but we didn't drive there. We passed it, her little yellow cottage with the porch swing and the wind chimes, then turned down a gravel road that led toward the edge of town. My heart sank a little. I thought maybe she changed her mind. Maybe I wasn't even welcome there. Then she pulled up in front of an old brick building with vines crawling up one side and faded paint on the other. The sign above the door was chipped but still readable, Magnolia Oven. "Wait," I said. "You're leaving me here?" She turned the engine off and looked at me. "Savannah, if I take you into my house right now, you know what the neighbors will say. They'll be knocking on my door before nightfall, wanting to know why the runaway brides camped out in my guest room. But here," she gestured toward the building, "here, nobody will bother you." My hands were shaking when I reached for the door handle. I don't even know how to be alone. Aunt Jolene softened a little. "Honey, you were alone the minute that man decided he didn't love you enough to show up. But being alone ain't always a curse. Sometimes it's where you find yourself again." Inside, it smelled like dust and wood smoke and something else. Something warm beneath all the decay. The old bakery had high ceilings and wooden beams that had turned black from years of oven heat. Sunlight filtered through cracked windows, casting golden streaks across flour-covered tables and rusted equipment. "This place hasn't been touched in years," she said, flipping on a light that flickered weakly before steadying. "Used to be 10 people working here. Now it's just ghosts and old stories." She led me to a small back room with a metal-framed bed, a desk, and a shelf of yellowing cookbooks. A folded quilt sat at the foot of the mattress, smelling faintly of lavender and thyme. "I cleaned up best I could," she said, setting my bag down. "You've got electricity, running water, and a lock on the door. It ain't the Ritz, but it's safe. It's yours for as long as you need it." I stood there, taking it all in, and for the first time since the phone call, I felt something besides grief. Not hope exactly, but a flicker, a pause in the pain, a quiet. "I don't know how to thank you," I said. "You don't," she replied, already halfway out the door. "But don't go lying here in the dark feeling sorry for yourself. If you're going to stay here, you're going to do something with your hands. Clean, rearrange, paint, bake, something." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. She was right. I didn't know who I was anymore, but I couldn't figure it out lying still. That night, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still in my wedding dress, and listened to the creak of the walls, the hum of silence, and the sound of my own breath filling the empty space. No one knew where I was. Not Mama, not Travis. Just me and the bones of an old bakery that once fed a whole town. It should have felt lonely, but somehow it felt like the start of something real. The next morning, I woke to light streaming through the dusty windows and the distant sound of a rooster. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the faded beams overhead, the chipped white paint on the walls, and the suitcase by the door. And I remembered. I wasn't a bride anymore. I didn't change out of the dress until noon. I finally peeled it off and hung it in the tiny closet next to the utility aprons that had been left behind. Seeing it there, white and crumpled, surrounded by the smell of yeast and old wood, felt symbolic in a way I wasn't ready to explain. I spent the day sweeping. Dust clung to every surface like memory. I opened the windows and let the wind carry out as much of it as it could. I wiped the old counters, shook out the rugs, and took the cracked dishes down from the shelves just to give them purpose again. I didn't know why I cared, but I did. When the kitchen was clean enough to breathe in, I sat by the giant brick oven in the center of the room and ran my hand along its edge. The bricks were blackened from years of use, but solid, strong. I leaned in, breathed deeply, and caught something faint beneath the dust. A smell like warm dough and caramelizing sugar. A memory I didn't own. Maybe someone else's story lingering in the walls. If you could talk, I whispered to the oven, I bet you'd have a hell of a tale. That night, I went to the little general store on the corner to pick up some groceries. The bell jingled above the door as I stepped inside, and instantly I felt all eyes turn. It was a small town. I knew what they saw: an unfamiliar face, a young woman buying single portions and dish soap. And the rumors had already started. Behind the counter was a woman in her 50s with cat-eye glasses and a name tag that read Cheryl. She leaned over the register like it was a secret-keeping box. "You must be Jolene's niece," she said with a smile too wide to be innocent. "Heard you're stayin' at the old bakery. That's unusual." "Guess I'm unusual," I replied, trying to sound lighter than I felt. "Well, that place has got bones," she said. "People still remember the bread from there. I used to sneak a slice before school when Miss Loretta ran the ovens. Best sourdough I ever tasted." That name stuck with me. Loretta. Back at the bakery, I made a simple dinner and sat by the window as the sky darkened. The air was thick with humidity, and somewhere in the woods behind the shop, cicadas were screaming like they had something to prove. I couldn't stop thinking about that smell, about the way the oven seemed to hum when I touched it, about how good it felt to scrub a counter until it shined. Something inside me was tugging, urging me toward movement. What if I tried? The thought arrived quiet, almost ridiculous. I'd never baked anything from scratch in my life, not without a box mix or a YouTube tutorial. But something about this place made me want to learn. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the oven. Or maybe it was because I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I asked Aunt Jolene about Miss Loretta. She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "I want to learn to bake." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, you're in luck. Loretta's still around. Lives over in Birch Hollow, just 15 minutes down the highway. Don't get your hopes up, though. She's stubborn as a mule and twice as particular. But if anyone can teach you, it's her." And just like that, the first ember of something new began to glow. Aunt Jolene's old pickup, grown the whole way to Birch Hollow. The road curved through woods and farmland until it spilled out near a weathered little cottage with green shutters and sunflowers leaning over the fence. That was where Miss Loretta lived, a woman I hadn't met, but whose name already carried the weight of cinnamon and yeast in my imagination. She answered the door before we knocked. Small and wiry, with silver curls pulled back in a scarf and a pair of hands that looked like they'd wrestled dough for 40 years. Her eyes scanned me like a ledger. Quick, sharp, no nonsense. "So," she said, arms crossed, "you're the runaway bride from Wayland." I flushed. I didn't think it would reach this far. "I'm Savannah," I managed. "I heard you used to bake at Magnolia Oven. I'd like to learn." Miss Loretta didn't move. She looked at me, then at Jolene, then back again. "Why?" I hesitated. I didn't know how to explain that I needed to bake, like I needed to breathe. That after being left at the altar, I wasn't sure what I was anymore. But I knew I couldn't go back to who I'd been. "I just want to try," I said. "That's all." She stared a second longer, then finally stepped aside. "You got shoes that can handle flour?" That was how my apprenticeship began. The first day, she had me sweep. Not the kind of sweeping I did at the bakery. This was more like a ritual. Then we cleaned the workspace, wiped every surface, and set out the ingredients like soldiers preparing for battle. "Baking," Miss Loretta said, "ain't just mixing things together. It's rhythm, patience, feeling. Dough knows if you're lying." I laughed, nervous, unsure, but nodded. She showed me how to bloom the yeast, how warm the water should be, how to mix without bruising. The first batch was a disaster. Too wet. The second was better, but still collapsed in the pan. "Stop fighting it," she said, watching me struggle. "Let it tell you what it needs." "Dough doesn't talk," I muttered. "Oh, but it does. Not in words. You just have to listen with your hands." I didn't sleep that night. My body ached. My fingers smelled like salt and grain. But I felt something I hadn't felt in months, engaged, present. tethered to the world by something warm and rising. By the end of the week, I could knead without looking down. I knew how to shape the loaves and check their proof by touch alone. And when Miss Loretta finally let me slide one into the oven by myself, I held my breath the entire time. It came out imperfect, edges too brown, crust a little thick, but when she sliced it open and steam rolled out, she nodded once. "Not bad," she said. "Not great either," I replied. She grinned. "If it were perfect already, you wouldn't need me." We kept going. Every morning, I drove out to her cottage and worked until my arms were sore. I took notes, asked questions, messed up a dozen more times, but each failure taught me something. And slowly, almost shyly, I began baking in Magnolia oven too, just a few loaves a day, starting at dawn, dust floating in golden light like flour in the air. The town noticed. Cheryl from the store was my first customer. She bought a sourdough and came back 2 days later asking if I could make cinnamon rolls. A retired schoolteacher asked for honey wheat. I scribbled recipes in a notebook, made mistakes, burned 3 pans, but people kept coming. They didn't just want bread. They wanted something that felt like memory, like home. One evening, after I'd cleaned the last of the trays, I stood in the middle of that old bakery and whispered, "You still with me?" I pressed my palm to the warm brick oven. It was like it exhaled beneath my hand. That night, I wrote a sign by the door in chalk. "Open Saturday's fresh bread, made by hand." I didn't know if anyone would come, but I was finally learning how to rise. The smell of cinnamon and rising dough filled the air that morning. I had just pulled a tray of honey oat loaves from the oven when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I wiped my hands on my apron, expecting Cheryl or one of the regulars. But when I stepped outside and saw the car, my stomach dropped. It was an old silver sedan, scratched door, Georgia plates. I knew that car better than I wanted to admit. Travis stepped out like he was walking into familiar territory. Same slouched shoulders, same hesitant half smile, but thinner, paler, like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Hey, Savannah," he said, eyes scanning the front of Magnolia oven like he didn't recognize who I'd become. "Travis," I replied, flat as a cutting board. I didn't invite him inside. "I was just passing through," he lied. "Right." He glanced down the road, then back at me. "I've been here before," he admitted quietly, eyes fixed on the gravel. "A month ago, I parked across the street and watched people line up for your bread. I almost came in, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say." He stood there, hands in his pockets, shifting from one foot to the other like a boy waiting to be scolded. "Can we talk?" he asked. "You're already doing it." He winced but didn't back down. I know I messed up. What I did, it was unforgivable." I leaned against the porch post and crossed my arms. "That's one word for it." "I was scared," he said. "Everything felt too big, too final. I panicked." "You panicked an hour before our wedding," I said, and I felt my voice tremble, but not from pain, from anger held in too long. "I've thought about that day every single one since," he continued, "and I want to fix it, if you'll let me." Something in me almost laughed. Not cruel, just tired. I looked at him, the man I'd once imagined raising kids with, building a porch swing with, growing old beside, and all I felt was distance, like remembering someone from a dream that no longer made sense. "You want to fix it?" I asked softly. "Tell me something, Travis. Did you fall back in love with me? Or did you just expect I'd stay frozen in time until you changed your mind?" He blinked. The question hit harder than he expected. I just miss you," he said. "I miss what we had." "What we had," I repeated. "You mean before you decided I wasn't enough to show up for?" His shoulders slumped. "I didn't come to fight. And I didn't come to hear apologies that changed nothing." He stood there, hands hanging useless by his sides, like he didn't know what to do with them anymore. "I thought maybe we could try again. I see now. I was wrong. You're different." I nodded. "I am." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. When he finally turned and walked back to his car, I watched the dust trail follow him down the road. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed long and deep and felt something inside me finally loosen. I wasn't waiting anymore. When the dust finally settled, I realized I hadn't just closed the door on Travis. I had closed it on the woman who once measured her worth by someone else's promises. That version of me, the one who begged for love, for presents, for crumbs, was finally gone, and I didn't miss her. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast warm amber light through the bakery windows, I took off my apron and sat at the long wooden table where I shaped the dough. The place was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the smell of cooling bread. I reached for the drawer where I kept important papers and pulled out the business card Mason had given me weeks ago. I hadn't called him yet, not because I didn't want to, but because a part of me had been waiting to see if the past would come knocking first. Now it had, and I had answered with silence. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "This is Mason Carter." "Mason, it's Savannah, from Magnolia Oven." A pause. Then, warmly, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I'm ready," I said. "Let's talk." Mason showed up 2 days later with a leather folder under one arm and that same calm, grounded presence that had made me curious the first time we met. He walked through the doors of Magnolia Oven like he belonged there, not as a guest, not as a buyer, but as someone who respected the bones of a place and the woman who kept it alive. We sat at my dough table, now doubling as a conference desk, with a pot of tea between us and sunlight spilling across the floor. "I've looked into the property records," he said, unfolding the papers. "The building's owned by the county. They're willing to sell. 300,000 flat. No liens, no back taxes. Just old brick and big dreams." I let out a low whistle. "That's a lot of zeros." Mason nodded. "It is, but not impossible. I'll cover the full cost for now," he said gently. 300,000 is a lot, but I'm not investing in walls. I'm investing in you. The ownership's yours, because this place wouldn't exist without your hands, your story." I stared at him. "You'd give me 40%? He smiled. "Savannah, this place already has a soul. I'm not here to take that. I'm here to help it grow." I looked down at the table where my palms had pressed dough into shape day after day. I thought about the cracked oven, the burn mark on my apron, the notebook where I scribbled every failed recipe and accidental success. None of this had come easy, and yet none of it had ever felt like a burden. "You're serious," I said. "Completely." I nodded slowly. "Then let's do it." The week that followed felt like a storm of paperwork and county inspections. I filled out forms I didn't understand, sat through meetings about health codes and business licenses, stood in line at the bank with shaking hands. But Mason was there, every step, translating legal jargon into plain English, reassuring me when I felt small, reminding me that this wasn't just his investment. It was my story. By Friday afternoon, I held the deed in my hands. Magnolia Oven was mine. Mine in ink and law, mine in sweat and hope. That night, I stood in the middle of the bakery and let it sink in. I ran my fingers across the same counter where Miss Loretta once rolled dough, touched the bricks of the oven like they were part of my own spine. I wasn't just baking anymore. I was building something that could last. The next morning, Mason picked me up early. "I want you to see the stores," he said. "Come meet the people who'll be selling your bread." The drive to the city was quiet, comfortable. He told me about his first shop, how it had started with a single shelf of local honey and grew into a network of markets that carried everything from heirloom tomatoes to small batch preserves. He wasn't flashy. He didn't name drop. He just believed in honest food and the people who made it. When we pulled into the parking lot of the first store, I felt nerves twist in my stomach. But inside, it wasn't what I expected. No neon lights, no corporate gray walls, just wood shelves, baskets of fresh produce, and the scent of real food. A girl named Lena behind the counter waved and smiled. "So this is the baker?" she asked Mason. I blushed. "I'm still learning." "We all are," she said. At the second store, an older man in an apron shook my hand and said, "You bring that cinnamon bread you made last week, and I'll clear a whole shelf." At the third, a mother with 2 kids asked if I made dinner rolls. By the time we drove back, I had a notebook full of requests, names, and ideas. My head ached, but in the best way, not from confusion, but from vision. As we reached Willow Creek, Mason slowed the truck and glanced over at me. "You did good today," he said. "Thanks." "I mean it." I smiled. "So do I." That night, I didn't feel like a woman who'd been left in a wedding dress. I felt like an owner, a creator, a woman who had taken what broke her and turned it into something that could feed the world. 6 months later, Magnolia Oven was no longer just a building. It was alive again. 3 ovens fired from dawn to dusk. The air inside constantly smelled of rising dough, sugar, and cinnamon. I had 5 employees now, 2 high school girls who helped with prep and deliveries, a retired postmaster who shaped loaves like it was a sacred ritual, and Miss Loretta, who still came in twice a week to supervise but mostly just drank tea and smiled when she thought no one noticed. We baked close to 100 loaves a day. Sourdough, honey oat, rosemary olive oil challah on Fridays. Sometimes I'd pause while brushing butter on a fresh crust and think, this came from nothing, from heartbreak, from ashes. The town responded. People lined up on Saturday mornings before we even opened. Tourists wandered in after hearing about us from some food blogger I'd never met. Kids left sticky-fingered and smiling. It was chaos. It was beautiful. And it was mine. Mason kept his word. He didn't interfere. But he did show up, sometimes with order forms, sometimes with new packaging ideas, sometimes with just 2 coffees and a warm, "How are you holding up?" He never pushed, never asked more than I was ready to give. But he was there, always just there. And slowly, something softened in me. One night, after we'd finished a massive batch for a citywide food festival, I found him wiping down the front counter. Flour smudged his shirt, and he looked less like a businessman and more like someone who belonged. "Why do you keep showing up?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised by the question, then shrugged. "Because I believe in this place. And in you." The words hit somewhere deep. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. He didn't press. We just stood there, in the hush of the after-hours bakery, while the ovens cooled and the moonlight filtered through flour-dusted windows. A few days later, Miss Loretta came by for her usual afternoon visit. She eyed the new delivery rack and sniffed approvingly at the batch of buttermilk biscuits, cooling by the window. "You've built yourself something real," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." She waved that off with a snort. I just pointed at the dough. "You were the one needin' through all the mess." Then she looked at me, serious. "And that Mason boy, he likes you." "I know." "You like him?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because admitting it meant letting go of something I had used as armor. "Yes," I said quietly. "But it's different this time." She nodded. "It should be. Different's good." That evening, Mason stopped by after closing. He brought over 2 lemonades and news from the city. We'd been featured in a small regional magazine. Nothing huge, but enough to make people curious. Enough to prove what we were doing mattered. As we sat on the front steps of the bakery, sipping quietly, he turned to me. "Can I ask something?" "Go ahead." "Are you still scared?" I thought about it, about how I used to lie awake, wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again, about the voice in my head that used to whisper, "You're only what he left behind." "No," I said, "not anymore." He nodded slowly. Then, carefully, he reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. Inside, the ovens were silent, the bread cooling. The air smelled like flour, sweat, and something sweeter like peace. Outside, the world kept spinning. But here was mine. Some mornings, I still wake up before the alarm. Not because I have to, my staff can handle the early shift now, but because something in me wants to. There's something sacred about walking into a quiet bakery before the world stirs. The smell of cool stone, the hush of flour settling in the air, the feeling that this day, like a fresh loaf, is still being shaped. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I understand it was just the oven preheating. One Sunday, I found myself back at the closet in the back room, the one where I had hung my wedding dress all those months ago. It was still there, pressed between aprons and flour-dusted jackets. I touched the fabric gently. It no longer made my throat tighten. It was just fabric now, just a symbol of a life I almost had and no longer wanted. I didn't cry. I smiled. That same afternoon, I walked out to the front porch and found Mason reading over delivery invoices. He looked up, squinting into the sun. "You look lighter," he said. "Maybe I am." He stood. "I've got something to show you." We drove 10 minutes outside town to a small patch of land he'd purchased, flat, open, and kissed by wind. "This," he said, "could be the site of our first storefront." Our first. I laughed. "Well, I thought we could build something bigger. A place that holds both our names. A cafe, a bakery, maybe even a teaching kitchen." He glanced over, suddenly unsure. "If you want that." I looked out over the grass, imagining a wooden porch, fresh loaves in the window, the sound of laughter and clinking mugs. A place filled with community, not just commerce. "I want it," I said, "but only if we build it the way we built this, slow, honest, and together." He smiled. "That's the only way I know." Back at Magnolia Oven that evening, I sat with Miss Loretta while she sipped her chamomile tea and watched a new batch of sourdough rise behind the glass. "You've come a long way, sugar," she said. "I had a good teacher." She chuckled. "You had something better. You had a reason." She was right. I hadn't baked just to forget Travis. I had baked to remember myself. To remember that I could shape something beautiful from chaos, that I could rise again, even when everything inside me had once collapsed. Later that night, after locking up, I sat in the silence and wrote something in my journal. Travis left me in a white dress, thinking he was breaking me, but he only broke the version of me that was waiting for someone else to define her worth. What rose from those ashes wasn't a victim. It was a maker, a woman who feeds others, who leads with her hands, who creates joy from flour and fire. I am not someone's almost wife. I am Savannah Brooks, and I have a damn good oven. Weeks passed, then months, and life, real life, settled in. The kind without grand gestures or dramatic exits. Just days filled with work and sweetness and small decisions made side by side. One evening, I stood at the back doorway, watching the sun dip behind the trees, and felt arms wrap around my waist. "You ever think about that day?" Mason asked softly, "The one where it all fell apart?" "No," he whispered, "the one where it really began." I turned and looked at him, at the man who had walked into my story not to rescue me, but to build with me. And I said what I now knew to be true. Every day, he kissed my temple, and we stood in the doorway while the night rolled in, warm and familiar. Inside, the bakery smelled like tomorrow, and I was finally home. Sometimes, life breaks you open not to destroy you, but to let something new rise from within. Savannah wasn't saved by a man or a business deal or even a bakery. She was saved by her own hands, by the quiet work of healing, by choosing to build instead of collapse. Her story reminds us that being left behind isn't the end. It's a pause, a space, and in that space, if you dare to breathe again, to need again, to believe again, you just might find a version of yourself that's stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever before. The bread of your new life won't be handed to you. You'll have to make it: flour, salt, tears, and fire. But when you taste it, you'll know it was worth every broken piece.